the theory, part of what is helping to explain why we see this increase in breast cancers in female. The other half is stress. And if you look in your packet, I wrote an article about cell phones. And I kid my kids all the time, you know, disconnect from the matrix. You gotta, when we haven't any idea whether or not this is a stressor. I guess it's individual. For some people it's comforting. For other people it's a source of, what do they say? What should I reply? What should I say? It speeds things up. You could look at it as being a stressor. Well, so how does stress affect progesterone? Similar to the way the guys burn up testosterone under stress, females burn up progesterone under stress. And it's not so much to say that you're burning it up and using it, it's that it's not getting created. The hypothalamus of the brain, and this is why I think if you look at the endocrine system, that's what we're talking about. A lot of people like to call it holistic medicine, and you know, the DEA and the FDA are all, the doctors are calling it anti-aging, and they're this and that. This is pure and simple the endocrine system, and it is one of the first systems that developed in our bodies. It is controlled in many ways to the hypothalamus. It's a little small gland at the base of the brain. So before we even developed these big brains that control all this neurological stuff that came thousands and tens of thousands of years later, we started with a way of communicating with cells, a way of directing things to happen in our bodies through the hypothalamus. So if you see something that's agitating you constantly, whatever it is, finances, lost your job, cell phones, Facebook, who's posting what, whatever that stimulus is, your body has to interpret it as to whether or not it's threatening to you. It's something you don't understand. Eyes, sense of smell, hearing, all that neurological input, where the endocrine system and these chemicals that get released and the whole balance of it all, where those two worlds meet is at the hypothalamus. Because the hypothalamus releases the initial hormones that go, it has a straight blood vessel right to the pituitary gland just below it. When that pituitary gland gets stimulated by something that the hypothalamus is seeing as threatening, oh my gosh, she sent me a text, he's breaking over the moon, the stress starts, the hypothalamus is going to release some it's going to release an ACTH stimulating hormone. It goes down there and it goes to the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland goes and it releases ACTH, it goes to the blood, goes to the adrenal glands, and it releases cortisol. And it starts right here. Sometimes you can't do anything about that. Sometimes females, and I can sense that in personalities. Sometimes females, you know, you just happen to be wired a particular way. It's hard to, you know, it's hard to try to change something like that if just genetically you're predisposed to having a brain wiring that makes you see things in a different way that other people see them. But whatever it is, whatever that stimulus is, it's the hypothalamus that eventually turns it into a hormone response. So back to the ugly chart. Where's that cortisol? What's the cortisol doing? Okay, it's your stress hormone. It's that low level energy that you have. Almost similar to the adrenaline that is produced. Adrenaline is like cortisol on steroids. Okay, adrenaline is what gives you that strength to lift the car off the baby if you needed to. Cortisol is what should be highest at 6 a.m. when you wake up, and it gives you energy throughout the day. And then come midnight, it's at its lowest. You go to sleep. Melatonin production from the pineal gland gives you a good night's sleep. Cortisol gets replenished in the adrenal glands. You're ready to wake up at 6 a.m. and your cortisol should be high again. So what do you do if the hypothalamus is constantly bombarding you with something that you think is threatening? It's not a high blood pressure issue. It's not going to take this whole cascade of things that your body's making and turn it into aldosterone, although, you know, you probably are going to want to raise your heart rate a little bit, so you might see some pull from here. Bones, are you worried about strengthening your bones? Are you worried about strengthening your immune system? The fight or flight response, because of high cortisol, is all about the body getting and not having to focus on things that it thinks isn't important. Immune cells, building bones, building your muscle. It's all about running. Jack up your sugar levels to be able to feed your muscles. Suppress the immune system. Don't let any energy go into, making white blood cells and lymphocytes and, when you've got to run. So if the hypothalamus is perceiving things, it's a cascade of events that eventually what you otherwise would have had nice high levels of progesterone and nice calming is blown right through that, goes down to 17-hydroxyprogesterone right into cortisol. And if I could, I was thinking, if I could come up with a mechanical device that I thought would explain this cascade of things, I would have a 55-gallon drum of a liquid, and I would fill it up with what would represent your mother hormone, pregnenolone. Then I'd have a hose off of it that went to this barrel, a smaller 5-gallon bucket that would be progesterone, and then another one off of that. And when the bucket over here that represented the cortisol, for whatever reason, started to lower, it would cause that whole cascade of events. Ways to replace progesterone. And one last point on progesterone, which is a theory. If progesterone is responsible for determining when is a good time to reproduce, okay, if things are nice, there's no stresses, there's no bears chasing you where the herd is constantly on the run, if there's plenty of food, if progesterone is nice and high, if progesterone is responsible for that component of nature saying it's okay to let the herd grow, what's the mechanism that nature has to thin the herd if the herd is too big for the environment around it? You cannot help but link that theory that it starts with not having enough progesterone and it just cascades into this cortisol, stay on the run. And the problem with cortisol, where it comes to the immune system, like I said, you develop a cancer every day. If your immune system isn't functioning optimally, that cancer cell is going to go 2, 4, 8, and before you know it, it's not going to be able to get a leg up on it. The other part is, eventually, the glands is going to run out of their juice. You're only given like a life's allotment worth of, these glands can only produce so much. And where the brain is concerned, and this is particularly important, your brain is nothing but a whole series of glands. So for one nerve to talk to another, you got to sleep enough in order to build up the serotonin in this gland. So when you picture something or you have a thought, okay, this gland's got to release its stuff, it's got to go over and it continues on the electrical current that gives you an image, okay? So if you end up using up your store of cortisol, what ends up happening in the female? A female will, if they're under stress, this cortisol rush that they have, it can last a year and a half. You feel great. It's kind of like hypertension. It's kind of like a little bit of diabetes. When your blood sugar is high, you feel real good. The cortisol rush that you have for a year and a half is great. But then the gland only has so much juice. We're only given so much, our life's allotment. You eat too much sugar, the insulin in your pancreas, you're going to use it up. Okay? So what eventually happens with cortisol in the female is everything gets flip-flopped around, and now instead of your cortisol being highest at 6 a.m., it's highest at midnight. And the common complaint is females, I can't sleep. I only sleep a couple hours, I get up, and then I'm walking the floors again. Your cortisol's too high. And once the cortisol runs out, the depression, what's the other way the body has, there's a triangle. When one starts to falter, the other's got to pick it up. That's where the thyroid and with the females come in, all these females that are on thyroid. Once the cortisol starts running out, and you're like, during the day, you're just constantly walking around, and the thyroid gland is going to try to jack your metabolism up. It's one of the few things you have left. Testosterone might elevate, but again, it's not the stimulator that cortisol is.